Welcome, everyone. It's Dr. Stephen Lindner, and what we're going to be looking at in this lecture is going to be the endocrine system. And when we talk about the endocrine system, it's important to do a quick comparison between the neural system and the endocrine system, because both these systems are really working together to regulate human physiology and to control all the body parts and to control what we call homeostasis. And homeostasis is really about uh, the body creating not just balance, like things are even, right? Like a seesaw, where you have two kids that are the exact same weight and then there's no movement. It's this constant up and down mechanism where something can be really, let's say blood pressure could be really high, but then the body finds a way to balance it. Or blood sugar could be really high after a meal, and then the body finds a way to balance it, right? That's homeostasis. It's really a dynamic state of change and balance. So the neural system and the endocrine system, they're going to act together to coordinate all the systems of the body. The effects of the endocrine system perhaps last a little bit longer than the effects of the neural system, right? So if you're running on a treadmill and you're sprinting really quick for about 30 seconds, your heart rate is going to be fast and you're going to be breathing a little bit quicker. And that's due to the neurological response. However, if um, someone cuts you off in a parking lot and they steal your space that was rightfully yours because you were there first, all of a sudden you can feel your blood pressure go up. You could feel your heart pounding in your chest, especially if the person approaches your car. So in fact, the effects of the endocrine system from that particular reaction can last not just minutes, it can last hours, where you can feel your heart racing, you could feel a pit in your stomach, you could feel nauseous. And then a few hours later, a friend can say to you, hey, you want to grab lunch? And you could still feel nauseous due to that negative experience in the parking lot. So the effects of the endocrine system tend to be longer lasting than those of the neural system. Both the neural system and the endocrine system are going to use these chemical messengers to create certain types of responses and effects. The neural system uses neurotransmitters, whereas the endocrine system uses hormones. Both of these, whether they are neurotransmitters or hormones, they are going to be looking for receptors on a specific part of the body called target cells. And that's what they're going to be acting on. Okay. An exocrine gland, right? We're talking about endocrine. So, exocrine gland, these glands are going to secrete their products into ducts, okay, not into the bloodstream, but directly into ducts, none of which are going to be hormones. So exocrine glands do not secrete hormones. The exocrine glands include your sweat glands, called sudoriferous, your oil glands, called sebaceous glands. We have mucus glands, and you even have digestive glands. Again, none of these are secreting their products into bloodstream. They're going directly into the ducts, which will release their content to the epithelial surface, whether it's outside of the skin or whether it's within the digestive tract. Endocrine glands, on the other hand, they're going to secrete hormones. Now, endocrine glands, these do not have ducts. Instead, they secrete their hormones directly into interstitial fluid that surrounds them. Okay. The hormones diffuse into the bloodstream, through capillaries, and then they're carried to their target cells. Some endocrine glands include the pituitary gland, the thyroid gland, the parathyroid gland, the adrenal gland, and the pineal gland or pineal gland. And I'll show you where some of these are, and then we'll talk about the hormones they release as well as some of their functions. So on the left-hand side, right here, this is going to be exocrine gland, and on the right-hand side, we're talking about endocrine. So endocrine, we're going to see traveling, we see the hormone traveling through circulation. Whereas on the exocrine gland, you have these secretory products. We have a duct, which is kind of like the opening portion in here, and it's going to release or secrete its byproducts through the duct. Maybe it's a mammary gland, maybe it's a sweat gland, maybe it's an oil gland or sebaceous gland. Okay. Now, certain organs and tissues that are not part of the endocrine system, they too can secrete, because they can secrete hormones only because the specific part contains secreting cells. And some of these secreting cells are found in parts of the body that may not be classically considered part of the endocrine system, right? When I think of endocrine, I'm thinking the pituitary gland. I'm thinking the thyroid gland. I'm thinking the adrenal gland. But we have other parts like the hypothalamus, which is in the brain, which can secrete things. We have the pancreas, which is part of the digestive tract, but it can secrete, it has secreting cells that can regulate blood sugar. What about the ovaries and the testes, right? When we think of ovaries and testes, we're thinking reproductive system. We're not thinking endocrine system, but yet the ovaries and testes both have secreting cells that are involved in your sex hormones. The kidneys, well, they're part of the urinary system, but the kidneys also have secreting cells that can regulate your blood pressure. The stomach, it's part of your digestive tract, but it has secreting cells that can affect it can affect how you metabolize or break down fat. Okay. The liver has secreting cells that's involved in regulating blood pressure. What else do we have? The skin. Yeah, the skin is an endocrine organ. It's involved in making vitamin D. Vitamin D is a hormone. Okay. And the liver and the kidneys and the skin are all involved in vitamin D production. Even the heart. The heart is part of the cardiovascular system, but it has secreting cells that can regulate its own blood pressure. And fat cells, adipose, these are involved in inflammation. And even the placenta can secrete hormones. So, thinking out of the box, there's a lot of other organs that are part of other systems that have secreting cells that have major impact over human physiology. So the whole idea to this picture is just to give you a general idea as to where these glands lie, right? So if we look at the brain, right, this is what you would cover when we talk about the neural system. We'll talk about the brain, but wow, if we look at the brain, we have the pituitary gland that is part of the brain, the hypothalamus that's part of the brain, and the pineal that's part of the brain. And you will cover these when you do neurology, especially the CNS, the central neural system, which is the brain and the spinal cord. But the hypothalamus and the pituitary, these two work very, very closely together, and you'll see that on the next slide. The hypothalamus produces antidiuretic hormone, which is abbreviated as ADH, and oxytocin. And although the hypothalamus is producing those, you can see that they are stored here in the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland. You can see oxytocin and ADH. So although the hypothalamus produces it, it's stored in the pituitary. The pituitary has two lobes, the anterior and the posterior, but the ADH and the oxytocin are stored in the posterior lobe. And the posterior lobe can then release them. And they'll have some important effects. We'll talk about them shortly. The anterior lobe, you see, releases 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 7 different hormones. And we'll go over in another slide what these hormones are. But it's important to know what their abbreviations are and what it stands for, because in a lot of blood work, if you're getting into nursing and healthcare, when you look at blood work, it may not say thyroid stimulating hormone and give you the lab results. It'll have it abbreviated as TSH. It may not have growth hormone spelled out for you. It may just say GH. Or LH, which stands for luteinizing hormone, or follicular stimulating hormone, right? So it's important to know the abbreviations and what they stand for. So the pituitary is in the brain, the hypothalamus is in the brain, and so is the pineal gland, which releases melatonin. Melatonin is involved in your biological clock. It helps you sleep at night. And there's been a lot of research lately on melatonin, especially with a few things. One of them is irritable bowel disease and being very helpful. And the other is with COVID. Melatonin has been shown to be quite helpful dealing with COVID. Okay, let's see what else we have. In the throat, we have the thyroid gland. And if you look up in the right, in purple, we have the parathyroid gland. So the thyroid gland kind of looks like a letter H that's in the throat, right? Kind of looks like this. That's the thyroid. And then I'll put I here for isthmus. This is the isthmus that connects the two lobes here. Okay, so now the other thing, so this is the thyroid gland. And on the posterior side, right, we're looking at the thyroid from the front, but on the posterior side, on the superior lobes and the inferior lobes, there are 4 glands, and those are called the parathyroid glands. And the thyroid and the parathyroid, I'll go over shortly, they do work together in regulating calcium balance. Okay, they're involved in regulating calcium. But what most people think about when they think of the thyroid gland, most people think about metabolism, which is true because of T3 and T4. So T4 is thyroxine, and T3 is called triiodothyronine. The T is for an amino acid called tyrosine. The T is for tyrosine. And the numbers 4 or 3 refer to the number of iodines that are attached to tyrosine. So if it's tyrosine with 4 iodines, we call it T4. If it's tyrosine with 3 iodines attached to it, then it's T3. Okay, but T4 is also known as thyroxine, and T3 is known as for 3, triiodo for iodine, triiodothyronine. And T4 gets converted to T3 primarily, a lot of people don't know this, but most of the functional T3 comes from the conversion of T4 to T3 that takes place in the liver. which is selenium dependent. You need this mineral selenium in order for that to happen. Okay, now that's the thyroid gland. And now the thyroid and the parathyroid work together in regulating calcium. That's because of this hormone called calcitonin, and then this hormone called parathyroid hormone off to the right. So those two are going to regulate calcium. Exactly how, I'll show you soon. Then we have the kidneys over here, and right above the kidneys is the adrenals. And when you look at the word adrenal, we do see the word renal. Renal means kidney. And the prefix AD means you're adding something to the renals. You're adding something to the kidneys, and that would be the adrenal glands. Sometimes it's called a suprarenal gland. Supra means above. So they're interchangeable terms, adrenal or suprarenal. And the take home to the adrenals is that the adrenal gland has two parts. It has an outer part called the adrenal cortex, and then it has an inner part called the adrenal medulla. And when I go over the adrenal glands in more detail, I'll show you the outer and inner portion. The outer portion produces or releases cortisol, cortisone, and corticosterone. Okay, cortisol, cortisone, and corticosterone. Those are called glucocorticoids. They're called glucocorticoids. Aldosterone, the adrenal cortex also produces aldosterone. That's a mineral corticoid. So cortisol is a glucocorticoid, but aldosterone is a mineral corticoid. And in the word corticoid, we see cortex. So that's a little hint that the adrenal cortex makes glucocorticoids, and it makes a mineral corticoid called aldosterone. And in the word mineral corticoid, you see mineral. The mineral that it's involved with is sodium, which is Na. It helps to retain sodium. Let's see what else we have. We have the pancreas right here. And the pancreas is involved in regulating blood sugar with insulin and glucagon. We'll go over that in more detail. And then we have some of these organs that are like accessory organs. They're secondary organs because they have secreting cells. Okay, so the heart, it's not really an endocrine organ, but it has secreting cells. It can produce ANP, which is atrial natriuretic peptide. And ANP works the exact opposite to aldosterone. They're exactly opposite. Whereas aldosterone is trying to hold on to sodium, which can increase blood pressure, whereas ANP, or atrial natriuretic peptide, is trying to get rid of sodium to try and lower blood pressure. Okay. The thymus secretes thymosins. That's involved with T cell formation for your T cells, for your immune system. And then when you're younger, somewhere around age 6 or 7, the thymus starts to go under atrophy. For the first few years of life, it really increases in size. And then as we get older, it starts to atrophy. Fat cells, adipose tissue, which are fat cells, they produce leptin. And leptin, when you eat foods with fat, it helps you feel full longer because of leptin. Adipose also, or fat cells, also release something called cytokines. 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 Cytokines are like inflammatory chemical messengers. The more fat you have, the more fat cells you have, the more inflammatory cytokines you have, the more inflammation you will have. So obesity and morbid obesity can take any inflammatory condition and make it worse. whether it's cancer, diabetes, osteoporosis, rheumatoid arthritis, MS, Parkinson's, leukemia, any inflammatory disease, fat cells can make worse due to the inflammatory cytokines. Your kidneys produce erythropoietin. Erythropoietin goes to the bone marrow and says, hey, let's make more red blood cells. So it's involved in red blood cell production. And calcitriol is a fancy way of saying vitamin D. The gonads, which are the testes and the ovaries, they're involved in making your sex hormones. Okay, so we have ovaries making estrogen and progesterone, and the testes producing testosterone. Okay. Okay, I'm going to take a little break here. When I come back, I'm going to go over the hormones and show you the connection between the hypothalamus and its good friend, the pituitary, along with the hormones that they produce.